Good morning to everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers of the CDOIQ APAC conference for giving me time to speak. Unfortunately, due to medical reasons, I'm unable to join you live at the conference today, but I will be joining via phone patch to answer any questions. My presentation today is called Building Ethical Algorithms. I felt that in the recent months, with the rise of ChatGPT and generative AI, this is a topic that needs to be discussed amongst data practitioners and non-data practitioners alike. And I hope to be able to surface not necessarily answers, but the key critical questions we need to be asking now that we're in this era of AI. I will divide my talk into 4 parts. I will start with a public health crisis, not the public health crisis you probably think, and then quickly segue into the 4th Industrial Revolution and the trends in technology. Then I will focus on the current era where AI has gone mainstream and look at how algorithms have fared in the recent years. And then I will close with a call to action on how we should be moving forward in this new age. So let's take a trip back in time, at the time when there was a public health crisis gripping the world. This was in the 19th century, in 1894, where the world was in the grips of what's now known as the Great Manure Crisis. The Great Manure Crisis was brought about by the rise of populations in cities and metropolises. And at that time, the major form of transport was horses. And where you have people, you have horses. And where you have horses, you have horse manure. And as cities got more and more populated, horse populations also increased and manure population also increased. At the same time, in the same period, was the rise of phosphate mineral fertilizers. And for the longest time, manure was actually the raw material for fertilizers. But with the emergence of mineral-based fertilizers, which was cheaper to store, not offensive to the smell, and generally easier to mass produce, the demand for manure as fertilizers dropped dramatically, which now also aggravated the manure problem. Well, as we now know today, the manure crisis was a big deal that in 1898, the Urban Planning Conference was canceled because people were saying, if anyone can't solve the manure crisis, there was no point to meet about urban planning. And all the experts, including sanitation, urban planning, even horse experts, couldn't figure it out until the turn of the century, where the automobile made a debut. So if you put yourselves back in this era, turn of the century, people were complaining about manure everywhere. And somebody started suggesting, what if the carriages drove themselves and we didn't need horses to drive them? It was such a radical idea, something closer to science fiction. But that was, in fact, what happened. And with the emergence of the car, in a few years, probably a little more than a decade, horses went out of fashion and everyone shifted to automobiles. This transition between horses and automobiles also marked the transition between the first and the second industrial revolution. And I believe this is the key to understanding what's happening to our society today, because there are many lessons we can pick out from the history of the industrial revolutions that will be useful today. According to the World Economic Forum, there have been no less than 3 industrial revolutions since the emergence of the modern world. The first industrial revolution was steam and the steam engine, which gave rise to the colonial era with steamboats and railroads, allowing the fast globalization of the world. Then the second industrial revolution was electricity, which brought with it a lot of the devices we know today, such as telephones, radio, cars, air conditioning. And this also led to the end of the colonial era, leading up to World War I and II. After the World Wars, the third industrial revolution was the rise of electronics, which brought a lot of the advanced gadgets we use today, such as the internet, cellular technology, mass production. And this is where we are, transitioning from the third industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution. One simple way of appreciating what the fourth industrial revolution is that up until the third industrial revolution, our relationships with machines was one way. We basically told the machines what to do, and depending on how good that interaction is, the machine would follow. But in the fourth industrial revolution, a big shift happened. The machines can now learn to act on their own, independent of us. And the reason for that is data. So these are five characteristics suggested by McKinsey that define the fourth industrial revolution. I'll start from the right. The rise of big data. Everything generates a data point today, and there's an unprecedented level of data and computing power available to everyone today at low cost. And the reason for this is everything is now connected. It is now impossible to do anything in society without generating a data point, whether an interaction on your credit card or on social media, to posting stuff online, to going through a video conference such as this. Everything is data-based. Data analytics is driving efficiency across business functions because you have a lot of data and it captures a lot of process. It is now theoretically possible to run your business completely electronically. And the most compelling part of the fourth industrial revolution is the emergence of what we call cyber-physical technologies. So these are technologies that were either difficult to obtain or hard to impossible before, but they're now available now and cheap. And the reason why they're called cyber-physical is that they allow the digital world and the real world to interact. Things like robotics, 3D printing, and of course, artificial intelligence. Now let's go to the present, 2023. What's happening now? In the last quarter of 2022, something interesting happened. OpenAI released ChatGPT. And ChatGPT is the latest in a long line of large language models that have been developed over the years. And alongside this is also the emergence of image generation software, such as Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and DALL-E, and the rise of intelligent automation. Now, what makes this rise in AI different from the past is in the past, you needed a lot of highly skilled people to use and run AI models. While ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion marked a big difference, the interfaces of these software do not require highly skilled labor. Pretty much anyone can use it. And that's what's disrupting the business world today. So let's draw a little distinction between what was the popular AI up until recently and what's different about the current AI being used now. And the main difference is up until recently, the most popular AI models being used were of the discriminative variety, while the new AI becoming popular now is generative. So what's the key difference? A discriminative model is a model that takes an input and gives you either a judgment or a calculation or a conclusion out of it. So you might, for example, feed a photo to a discriminative AI, and the discriminative AI will tell you whether that photo is a cat or not a cat, or the probability of the photo being a cat. While in generative AI, it works slightly differently. It's kind of like the opposite. You give a photo to a generative AI, let's say of a cat, and it's able to give you more examples of cats. Or you could prompt the generative AI with the word cat, and generative AI would give you cats. So one type of AI is not necessarily better than the other, but the use cases are definitely different. And what makes generative AI quite disruptive is, as I said, you don't need highly skilled programmers and scientists to use it. You still need scientists and programmers to develop it. But the generative AI being exposed to the public right now, you can actually prompt them using plain English. So examples of generative AI outputs include the generation of random samples and variations, the generation of completely original art, and as we, in the case of ChatGPT, conversations like humans. So what is the implication of all of these tools? And I think it's useful at this point to look back at some algorithms that have been used by the public and see how they have fared. And this gives us a clue of what we need to be mindful of when dealing with generative AI. Let's start with Waze, a popular direction finding tool, arguably a simple AI that gives you the best directions given a certain map. And it's also updated via crowdsourcing, so the map changes in real time. What can go wrong with this process? Well, very recently, some Israeli soldiers using Waze found their way to a Palestinian camp, and the ensuing altercation resulted in the deaths of some of the soldiers. And then way back in 2015, a couple was vacationing in Brazil, in Rio de Janeiro, and was using Waze to find their way to a resort. But owing to a typo or a spelling error, Waze inadvertently directed them instead to a slum where there was an ongoing gun war between two rival gangs, and one of the couple got shot and died. So I'm sure the creators of Waze never imagined these kinds of what we call edge cases that someone's life might actually be in danger because of following directions based on what is actually inadvertently uh, imperfect data. Let's talk about social media. Every social media platform operates on very similar principles. They're there to encourage engagement because engagement leads to marketing. So, for example, we have a user named Sally, and she likes mojitos. And because of the data gathered by the platform, it identifies Susan as similar to Sally. And because Susan and Sally share common characteristics, Susan is recommended mojitos because it's likely that Susan also likes the same things as Sally. On the other hand, you might have another user named Sean who also likes mojitos. And because Sally and Sean have a common like, Sally also likes Havaianas, and Havaianas is recommended to Sean. So these two relatively straightforward recommendation algorithms are what powers everything from the newsfeed on Google to YouTube recommended videos, the recommendations on eBay and Amazon. It's basically the principle that people will tend to like things they've liked in the past and like things similar that other people similar to them also like. And these are recommendation engines. Very elegant marketing tool as opposed to mass marketing, which tends to waste a lot of money because you're marketing to people who might not buy your product. Targeted advertising based on recommendation engines have a high rate of return. So how can this go wrong? Well, the proliferation of recommendation engines is incidentally also what's caused echo chambers, which basically is the phenomena that you only get exposed to information that you would like to get exposed to, and thereby depriving you of the variety of uncensored information you would have otherwise been exposed to. And this has heightened the polarization and the proliferation of hate speech and disinformation online. At the same time, in the case of Myanmar, the Rohingya people were targeted for hate speech by the Myanmar military using Facebook's targeting algorithms. So it is possible to weaponize this kind of technology. And similarly, I don't think the creators of social media envisaged that their platforms would be the venue of so much social injustice and hate. What about facial recognition, which is now one of the most commonly used technologies in public or in public services? So this is what happened in the UK's facial recognition service for passports. On the left, a man named Richard Lee couldn't get a passport because the algorithm thought his eyes were closed. Or on the right, a man named Joshua Bada couldn't get a passport because the algorithm thought his mouth was open. And the idea here is their eyes weren't closed and their mouths weren't open. It might simply could have been the data that was used to train this facial recognition algorithm was biased against ethnic minorities. And this is the UK. So now we have cases where an algorithm can be systematically unjust or systematically flawed because of the data process that created it. And then finally, let's talk about deepfakes. So deepfakes are obviously a creative tool. You can use it to generate new faces, swap faces together, create different versions of faces. But in the hands of the wrong parties, and if this is used for disinformation, what could happen? And then now we are in the generative AI era. And those are all old technologies compared to generative AI. What's happening in generative AI? Well, for one thing, large language models are hallucinating. They're creating highly probable pieces of text that are actually factually wrong. And this has contributed to the rise of people claiming that research provided by large language models is actually misleading or untrue. And in fact, you can try asking ChatGPT about yourself and see how much of a fictionalized biography you get. And the answer for this is quite straightforward. Large language models don't retrieve information traditionally like a database. It assembles information dynamically, probabilistically, based on common structures found in existing language. And that doesn't really mean that the data is accurate as far as we understand it. It just looks similar to other accurate data. User interactions are also unpredictable. So this is a man who committed suicide after having a conversation with a chatbot. Because the conversations were so lifelike, it's possible that these conversations will trigger human emotions in ways that we don't understand. For image generation tools, copyright is a big deal. And this is an example of an ongoing suit by Getty Images, filing suit against Stability AI that created Stable Diffusion. The image on the right even contains kind of the logo of Getty Images, clearly inspired by an original image. But this kind of image might actually pass most copyright laws because it's not the exact same image. It's a derivative, which is kind of a gray area. Somebody in my network created these images as a satire, basically notable personalities like Biden, Prince William, even Putin, rummaging a street market in Manila and eating street food. This was clearly done for demonstration purposes, but imagine if this was done for political purposes. What kind of misrepresentation would you do? In fact, this information space is now a problem area for generative AI. As you can notice, the fingers on this policeman in this fake press release about the protests in France. This policeman has 6 fingers, you know. So we now need to be wary of what I would call a failure of intuition. And one failure is we're used to the deductive approach when coming up to knowledge. We start with a theory and then try to back it up with facts. But the data science world actually works in the opposite manner. We start with a lot of data first and try to see if there are any facts we can get from that data. And that can be efficient but dangerous because we need to have first principles in place while we do the data analysis. Many data scientists are actually trained from academia, where we're trained to prioritize significance, references, publication. But business doesn't really care about that. Business cares about profit. It cares about politics. It cares about the day-to-day. And this is a cultural change for most people entering the commercial sector from academia. We also tend to divorce man and machine. Like in this news article, somebody ran his car into the railroad tracks following Waze, and the first reaction was it's probably driver error. But the bottom line there is, how can we consider technology in isolation of the users? We need to think about the users while we talk about technology. I've been talking about data ethics since 2019, and I noticed far more people are fascinated by data science and data engineering, programming, to a lesser extent, math. But ethics is largely left by the wayside. And we see this happening in recent staff turnovers in Twitter and Google, where the ethical data team was fired. And we now need to be mindful of these issues. In fact, the major term now is the alignment problem, where a model can be accurate as far as metrics are concerned, but they may not reflect the intentions of the modeler. In fact, like in the case of ChatGPT, GPTs only model the statistical structure of language. Does not necessarily mean it understands the higher level meanings behind language. And just to make our lives more complicated, there's a lot of confidence running around the AI space with a lack of competence. And this is the Dunning-Kruger phenomena that's documented. There's a lot of hype around AI. So we need to be mindful of the noise that's being generated. I think one of the fundamental problems that still plague the AI space is this issue of model drift. Basically, you train models technically on past data, which may not reflect future data. And this is a problem when the phenomena that the model is using has already shifted and the model is now consistently incorrect. So when we conceived of data ethics, people were used to talking about privacy and security, and these are certainly important. But what we notice is that these other issues like disinformation, ownership, liabilities, even data poverty and quality emerge after the privacy and security conversations are done. So privacy and security are not the only solutions. We need to go beyond that and look at the use of the data. At the same time, when you look at the root cause of most bad algorithms, it's owing to bad data. But the root cause of bad data is bad processes. And rarely do we talk about fixing processes before we fix the data and the algorithms. So I'm just about out of time, but I want to go back to where I started. There's a lot of learning we can get from the shift to automobiles. One of the biggest learnings for me is that it didn't matter how good you were with a horse. By the time everyone shifted to automobiles, your skills with the horse were pretty much useless. So we need to approach this new era with humility. It didn't matter what your skills were at the time before AI, you could be rendered completely useless in the era with AI. We have to be very, very deliberate at what these new technologies end up unraveling and stick to first principles. I'm just going to read the paragraph that came from Avropoulos about the manure crisis because it's just so good. He said the most important problems we face cannot be resolved by simply optimizing the current system. It requires radical technological innovation. Social problems are interwoven within the structure of the economy and habits of people, so the solutions have to address and influence social patterns first. The solution to the manure crisis did not come from horse and carriage experts or sanitation. It came from a completely different sector that kept the wheels of the carriages and changed everything else. So just to summarize, I talked about a public health crisis, the manure crisis. I talked about the fourth industrial revolution. I talked about AI going mainstream, and I talked about data ethics as a way forward. And I want to close with this. What distinguishes the fourth industrial revolution from its predecessors is the use of data and AI, which allow machines to act and learn on their own. Machines gain agency, but without a moral code. And that's where we come in. It is our duty as engineers, as scientists, as analysts, to ensure that we build ethical algorithms in machines. So will the ethical engineers, scientists, and analysts please stand up? So just a little bit about me. I run a portfolio of companies that focuses on AI. Zeralytics is my home organization. We do uh, design and development of AI use cases for companies. Data Ethics is a media company that creates awareness on the ethical challenges with AI and data. And ADs is a tech company that focuses on data-driven surveillance and risk management. I hope you enjoyed my talk. I'll be available for online Q&A. In the meantime, hope you can reach out to all of my social media accounts are posted here. In the meantime, thank you very much and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.